I was sitting at a closing table with a folder in front of me. A brass letter opener rested on top of it. My daughter sat across the table, smiling like this was the best day of her year. Everyone else in that room thought they knew why I'd come. The loan officer thought I was there to celebrate. The title agent thought I was there because Melissa asked me to be. My daughter thought I was there because she still didn't know what I knew. In about 4 minutes, I was going to open that folder, and every person at that table was going to find out exactly how much I knew. My name is Arthur Fenn. I'm 61 years old, and I spent 39 years doing other people's books in this town. For the first time in my career, I was about to hand someone a document instead of an invoice. Before I tell you what was in that folder, I need to tell you how I found out my daughter used my name without asking me. And I need to tell you why 9 minutes changed everything that came after it. Welcome to my channel. Get settled, because this one is going to take you somewhere. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button and make sure you're subscribed. Trust me, you're going to love it here. My name is Arthur Fenn. I'm 61 years old, and I've lived in Erie, Pennsylvania my whole life, 3 streets over from the house I grew up in. I started as a junior bookkeeper at Halloran and Fenn Accounting in 1987. That same week, my father-in-law handed me a brass letter opener and told me a man who opens his own mail never gets surprised by what's inside it. I kept that letter opener on my desk for 39 years. I still have it now. I was never the accountant with the biggest office or the loudest name on the door. I was the one people called on a Sunday when the bank was closing in on them Monday morning. I found the transposed digit that saved the Kowalski hardware store. I caught the payroll error that would have sunk the diner on 12th Street 2 Christmases running. I sat with Ray Delvecchio's father the year his construction company nearly folded and rebuilt his books from a shoebox of receipts until the number made sense again. I never charged half of them what the work was worth, and I never once called in what they owed me for it. That's not modesty. That's just how I was raised to keep a ledger, the kind that isn't written down anywhere, and the kind that still balances. My wife Lise died 4 years ago. Cancer, slow and then fast, the way it sometimes goes. In her last months I signed a power of attorney, a narrow one, limited to her hospice paperwork and her medical bills, nothing more than that. It let me handle the forms without dragging her through them. I filed the original in my desk drawer and forgot about it, the way you forget about a fire extinguisher. You don't think about it again until something's burning. Our daughter Melissa is 34. She runs an event rental business, Grasso occasions, tents, linens, the folding chairs for every wedding and graduation party in 3 counties. She started it at 26 with a used cargo van and 800 folding chairs bought second-hand from a shuttered banquet hall. She built it herself, one Saturday wedding at a time, without asking me for $1 of it. I respected that more than she ever knew. She's sharp, and she works harder than anyone I know. I have always been proud of her in the quiet way a father is proud of a daughter who stopped needing him a long time ago. She married Todd 7 years back, at a wedding her own company catered the tables for, which I always thought was a nice touch. Todd works in commercial insurance downtown, wears a tie even on Saturdays, and has opinions about everything from the Steelers' offensive line to how I should have invested my retirement. He's not a bad man, not in the way people usually mean that. He's the kind of man who tells a story about himself, and somehow makes himself the hero of every version of it. I've sat through enough Thanksgiving dinners to know the shape of that story by heart. In 7 years, he never once asked me how I actually built anything I built. He asked me plenty of other things. Never that. Grasso occasions had a bad year. 2 large weddings cancelled within a month of each other. One because the couple split up. One because the groom's family lost their deposit in a bank dispute nobody explained to Melissa. A warehouse lease came due at the worst possible time, the rent jumping by nearly a third after a new landlord bought the building. A competitor 2 towns over started underbidding every job in the county, cutting margins so thin that Melissa told me once, half joking, she was basically renting chairs for gas money. I knew some of this the way a father knows things. A cancelled Sunday visit here, a shorter phone call there, Melissa's voice a half step tighter than usual over dessert. I didn't know how bad it actually was. I want you to remember that, because it matters later. I didn't know how bad it actually was, and nobody sat me down to tell me the real number. What I also didn't know, not yet, was that half this town still owed me a favor I had never once called in. 40 years of Sunday afternoon bookkeeping does something you don't plan for when you're doing it. It puts your name, quietly, into rooms you're never invited to. The bank teller who processes a loan file. The compliance officer reviewing a flag signature. The title agent running a closing 3 counties over. None of them owed me money. All of them owed me something, and I never once thought about collecting on it. I just thought I was helping people. I didn't know yet how much that habit was about to matter. Thanksgiving fell on the 4th Thursday of November, same as it always does. I hosted it the way I've hosted it every year since Louise died. Turkey a little dry, because I still haven't gotten the timing right without her. Stuffing exactly the way my mother made it. Melissa and Todd arrived at 2 with a store-bought pie and an apology for being late that neither of them really needed to give. The house still smells like Louise around the holidays, or maybe I just tell myself that. I set the table for 3 the way I have for 4 years now, her chair pushed in at the head of it, untouched. Nobody in this family has ever had the heart to suggest moving it. Dinner went fine. Better than fine, if you didn't know what to listen for. Todd told a long story about a client account he'd saved from cancellation. It was the kind of story where he was the hero of every sentence, and the client barely got a name. Melissa laughed at the right places, the way you laugh when you've heard a story enough times to know where it belongs. I carved the turkey the way I always do, the way Louise taught me. I asked Melissa about the warehouse lease between slices. She gave me a version of an answer that told me nothing. Fine, Dad, just fine, we're figuring it out. It was the kind of answer a daughter gives a father when she's already decided he doesn't need to know the real one. At 3:45, right in the middle of my toast, Melissa's phone lit up on the table beside her plate. I was thanking everyone for being there, the same 3 sentences I say every year. She glanced at it out of habit. I watched her face change before she could stop it. She didn't mean to. I know that now. She meant to send it to Todd, sitting 4 feet away, texting back and forth under the table the way people do when they think no one's paying attention. Instead, her thumb caught the wrong name in the thread. The message landed on my phone instead of his, buzzing once against my hip while I was still holding my water glass in the air. I finished the toast. I sat down. I didn't look at my phone until dessert was cleared and Todd had gone out to his car for something. Then I read it. Dad, just sign it, we're family. You'll get it back before anyone even notices. I read it twice. I want you to sit with that for a second, because I did. Sign what? Get what back? Notice what? Everything okay? Melissa asked, watching me set the phone face down on the table. Fine, I said. You sure? I'm sure. That was it. 5 words total between us, maybe 6. I didn't ask what the text meant. I didn't want the answer handed to me across a dessert plate, softened and rehearsed. I wanted to find it myself, the way I'd found every other number that didn't add up in 39 years of looking. There was one more thing sitting in my coat pocket that I hadn't mentioned to anyone at that table, not even in passing. 4 days earlier, a collections notice had come to my house, not Melissa's, not Todd's. It was addressed to a business account I didn't recognize, referencing a loan I had never signed for. I'd assumed it was a mailing error, the kind that happens when 2 friends share a zip code with half the county. I'd folded it into my coat pocket on my way out the door and forgotten about it. The way you forget about a fire extinguisher standing in the corner of a kitchen you've never had to use. I want you to understand something about how I've spent my whole career. A number that doesn't match what you were told isn't proof of anything by itself. It's just a thread. You pull it once, gently, before you decide whether it's worth pulling all the way. 9 minutes after I read that text, I excused myself to the kitchen. I ran the tap so it would sound like I was rinsing a dish. I took the folded notice out of my coat and dialed the number printed at the bottom of it. My hands weren't shaking. I want to be honest about that, because it would make a better story if they were. They weren't. I was calm the way I get calm when a client's numbers don't add up, not angry yet, just paying closer attention than I had been 5 minutes earlier. I want to be clear about something, because it matters to how the rest of this goes. I wasn't angry standing in that kitchen. Not yet. I was doing what I've done for 40 years when a number doesn't match what I was told. I was checking. The woman on the phone from the collections office couldn't tell me much. Privacy rules, she said, unless I was a signer on the account. That single sentence told me more than she realized she was giving away. A signer. Someone had signed. Whoever it wasn't supposed to be optional information. Not something I had to pry out of a stranger's voice on Thanksgiving night, in my own kitchen, with the tap still running behind me. I didn't confront Melissa that evening. I said goodbye at the door like I always do, hugged Todd a beat longer than I meant to, told them both to drive safe. If you've ever smiled and waved someone off your porch while your mind was already 3 steps ahead, you know what that walk back into an empty house feels like. Then I called Sal Petrakis. Sal and I go back to 1989, when I did the books for his hardware store 2 doors down from my old office. He taught me how to throw a curveball my son never had the arm for, since we never had a son. Louise used to say Sal and I argued like brothers and forgave each other like brothers too, which was about right. Sal's retired now, same as me, but he still knows the loan officer at 3 different banks in this town. Sal's the kind of man who remembers birthdays, anniversaries, and every favor anyone's ever done for him down to the dollar. I asked him one question, plain and quiet: could he find out, without setting off any alarms, who was actually listed on a small business loan tied to Grasso occasions? It took him 4 days. 4 days of me going about my normal week, grocery shopping on Tuesday, church on Sunday. A phone call to Melissa on Wednesday, where I asked about the weather and said nothing about the notice still folded in my coat pocket. The first layer, there was a loan. $61,000, opened 8 months earlier, in the name of Grasso Occasions, co-signed by an individual guarantor. Not Melissa. Not Todd's name alone on the guarantee line. Mine. The second layer, the co-sign hadn't come from a fresh signature. It had come from a power of attorney on file. A document dated 4 years back, the same one I'd signed in the hospice social worker's office the week before Louise died. Narrow in scope. Limited to medical and end-of-life paperwork, nothing else. Somebody had photocopied that document, walked it into a loan office, and represented it as broader authority than it had ever actually granted. Not a misunderstanding. Not a form filled out wrong by accident. A scope, quietly stretched past what it was ever meant to cover. The third layer, the one that actually took the air out of the room for me, came from Sal reading me the loan file over the phone in his kitchen. Slow, the way he reads anything he knows is going to land hard. The signature on the guarantor line wasn't mine. It was close. Close enough to pass a teller's glance on a busy Tuesday. It wasn't mine. Arthur, Sal said. You want to sit down for the rest of this? I was already sitting down. My kitchen chair, the same one I'd been sitting in when the collections office told me nothing 4 days earlier. I didn't move from it for a long while after Sal finished talking. Todd's name was the loan officer's original point of contact on the file. Not Melissa's. Todd had walked the paperwork in himself, 8 months earlier. It was the exact moment the warehouse lease came due, and the 2 cancelled weddings had already blown a hole in the year's revenue. He told the branch, according to Sal's contact, that he had authority to sign on his father-in-law's behalf, and that he had the documentation to prove it. If you've ever sat across from a man telling you a story about how he saved something, think back on whether you asked him what it cost. And who paid it. I called a lawyer the next morning, not to sue my own daughter, I told him plainly, right at the start of the call. I wanted to understand exactly what I was looking at and what options a person in my position actually had. His name was Warren Cassano, an old classmate of mine from St. Peter's, semi-retired now, still sharper than most men half his age. He asked me to bring everything I had, the collections notice, the original power of attorney from my desk drawer, anything with a date on it. He read the file twice, slow, before he said a single word. This power of attorney was time-limited and purpose-limited, Warren said. Hospice paperwork only. Whoever used it for a commercial loan guarantee exceeded its scope. That's not a gray area, Arthur. That's forgery of intent, even if the pen strokes are close enough to fool a teller. Can it be undone? If you act before anything else gets built on top of it, Warren said. Yes. If you wait, and they refinance or consolidate that loan into something bigger before you move, it gets a lot harder to unwind. I sat with that sentence for a long moment. A lot harder to unwind. I didn't know yet how literally that warning was about to apply. The second layer I hadn't mentioned yet was smaller, and somehow it bothered me more than the money did. The loan file listed my occupation as retired, no income, which was true enough on paper. But it also listed an asset column as collateral value supporting the guarantee. My house, the one Louise and I paid off 19 years ago, the one with her gardens still out back. Nobody had asked me if my house could be used that way. Nobody had asked me anything. I sat in Warren's office a long while after he finished reading, turning that over. Not the dollar figure. The house. Louise planted those roses along the back fence this spring before she got sick. Some stranger in a loan department 3 counties away had reduced them to a line item on a spreadsheet. Without ever once dialing my number to ask if that was all right with me. If you've been listening for a while, do us one quick favor. Subscribe. It costs you nothing and it means everything to us. Hit the like button while you're at it, and drop your thoughts in the comments. I want you to picture what I was looking at 3 weeks after Thanksgiving. $61,000 borrowed in my name, on a document that was never meant to authorize it. Discovered by accident, through a misdirected text and a collections notice I almost threw away without opening it. A daughter who still had no idea I knew any of this. And a son-in-law who was already looking for a way to make the whole thing disappear before I ever found out how deep it actually went. That, at least, was what it looked like from where I stood. 6 weeks before that closing table, I filed a formal, notarized revocation of the original power of attorney with the county recorder's office. I sent certified copies to the bank that held the $61,000 loan and to Warren's file. It doesn't undo what already happened. It does something quieter and, in the long run, more useful. It puts a date-stamped line in the sand that says, from this point forward, nobody acts on my behalf using that document again. And it puts the bank on formal notice that the original guarantee is under dispute. Warren walked me through exactly what filing it would and wouldn't do. It wouldn't erase the $61,000. It wouldn't punish anyone automatically, and it wouldn't stop Todd from doing something equally foolish somewhere else if he was determined to. All it did, Warren said, was make sure whatever happened next happened with everyone looking at the same true document. Not the copy Todd had walked into a bank with 8 months earlier. I signed it in Warren's office on a Tuesday morning, notary standing right there watching my hand move across the page. I felt less like a man declaring war and more like a man simply correcting the record for anyone who cared to read it correctly. I didn't tell Melissa. I didn't tell Todd. I kept coming to Sunday dinner. I kept asking about the warehouse lease and getting the same soft non-answers, the kind that sound complete until you notice what they leave out. Louise used to say I had a good poker face for a man who never gambled. For 6 weeks, I found out she was right. I passed her the mashed potatoes, asked about Todd's insurance renewals, and never once let my voice catch on what I already knew. What I did instead was make some calls. Not accusatory ones. Just questions, the way I've always asked questions, the kind that sound like a retired accountant being nosy about a business he cares about. I called Deb Okonkwo Price first. Deb was a junior loan officer 22 years ago. I found a 6-figure compliance error buried in her branch's quarterly file before a state examiner ever laid eyes on it. I spent 3 unpaid Saturdays quietly walking her through fixing it before anyone above her ever knew it had existed. She sent flowers the week Louise died, unprompted, 20 years after that Saturday work, because Deb is the kind of person who remembers who helped her when it mattered. She's a senior underwriter now, one of 2 people in her branch who can approve anything over $250,000 on her own signature. I called and asked her, carefully, in general terms, whether a loan guarantee based on an old power of attorney could later be challenged, if the scope turned out to be narrower than what was represented at signing. She went quiet on the phone for a second longer than felt comfortable. "Arthur," she said, "is this about the Grasso Occasions file?" I hadn't said the name. She'd said it first. I let that sit in the air a moment before I answered, because it told me she'd already been thinking about this file long before I ever called. "I flagged an inconsistency on that guarantor signature 8 months ago," Deb said. "Sent it up for a second review. It came back cleared. Someone above me signed off faster than I liked. I never had a reason to push harder. Until you just called me." I sat with that for a long moment. I hadn't known anyone else had ever looked twice. 2 named instruments were already in motion before I'd made a single phone call. The notarized revocation, sitting in the recorder's office. And a flagged file, sitting quietly in a compliance queue that nobody had ever bothered to reopen. "I can't promise you anything, Arthur," Deb said. "But if that guarantee ever gets formally disputed, my flag is already sitting in the system with a timestamp 8 months old. That matters more than you'd think." She paused, and I could hear her deciding whether to say the next part. "I always wondered why nobody ever asked me about it again after it cleared. Now I think I know." 2 dramatic irony moments happened in those 6 weeks that I still think about. Both of them landed while I already knew more than either of them realized. The first came when Todd called me himself, cheerful, to invite me to what he called a little celebration at the title company. Grasso Occasions had been approved, he said, for a larger refinancing loan. It would consolidate their existing debt into one clean payment, and, in his words, finally get everything squared away properly. $340,000, he told me, practically singing the number down the phone line, like it was a birthday and not a debt. I asked him, gently, squared away from what exactly? He laughed and said paperwork, Arthur, just paperwork, and changed the subject to the Steelers' playoff chances before I could ask a second question. I understood, in that moment, exactly what the refinance was actually for. It wasn't to grow the business. It was to bury the $61,000 loan under a bigger, cleaner one before I could ever find it. Pay off the improperly guaranteed debt quietly. Replace it with fresh paper that had nothing to do with my name or my forgotten power of attorney. Let the whole first loan simply cease to exist on paper before I was ever the wiser. The second dramatic irony moment came the following week, from Melissa herself, over the phone. Her voice was bright in a way that didn't quite reach all the way through to the bottom of it. "Everything we worked so hard for is finally coming together, Dad," she said. "You have no idea how much weight this takes off us." I told her I was happy for her. I meant part of that, I really did. I was happy the weight might come off. I just knew, by then, exactly what that weight actually was, and exactly whose name had been carrying it for 8 months without ever being asked. I called Ray Delvecchio last, the title agent handling the closing. His father's construction company. I'd rebuilt it out of a cardboard shoebox of loose receipts 30 years ago. One weekend at a time, for nothing but a case of beer and a lasting friendship. Ray's father used to say Arthur Fenn could find a missing dollar in a burning building. I didn't ask Ray to do anything unusual. I only asked what time the closing was scheduled, and whether family members were welcome to sit in as observers. He said, of course, Arthur, anytime, family's always welcome at my table, and didn't ask me why I wanted to know. That's the thing about 40 years of favors. Nobody ever asks why. They just say yes, and they trust you had a good reason, because you always have before. If you've stayed with me this far, you already know where this was heading. Sit with that phrase for a second, squared away properly. A shortcut can call itself progress for as long as nobody checks the math behind it. The day someone finally does, it just gets called what it always was. The closing table sat in a small conference room at the title company on State Street. It was the same building where Ray's father used to keep his construction office 30 years back, before I ever rebuilt his books out of a shoebox. The room smelled like fresh coffee and new carpet. Deb sat at one end with the refinance paperwork squared in front of her in a neat stack. Ray sat beside her with the title documents already tabbed for signatures. Todd sat across from them in a new blazer I hadn't seen before, practically glowing, the way a man glows when he thinks he's already won. Melissa sat beside him in a green dress she used to wear to client meetings when the business was doing well. When I walked in, she stood up and hugged me before I'd even had the chance to set the folder down. "I'm so glad you came, Dad," she said. "This is going to fix everything." "I wouldn't have missed it," I said. That much was true. Todd shook my hand too hard, the way a man does when he's already decided he's won something before the last signature's even dry. "Big day, Arthur," he said. 340,000, clean slate, everybody sleeps easier tonight. He talked for almost 2 full minutes about the terms, the rate, how he'd handled everything himself so Melissa wouldn't have to worry about a single detail of it. He said he was relieved it had all finally come together so smoothly after such a hard year. I let him finish every word of it. A man tells you more about himself in 2 uninterrupted minutes than he ever means to. Deb slid the signature pages across the table, corners squared, a pen laid neatly on top. Todd reached for it. I set the folder on the table, the brass letter opener resting on top of it, exactly where it had been sitting on my desk for 39 years. And I opened it. "Before anyone signs anything," I said, "I need everyone at this table to look at something." The room went quiet the way a room does when the wrong sentence lands in the right silence. Todd's pen hovered an inch above the signature line and didn't move any closer to it. I slid 2 documents across the table toward Deb. The original limited power of attorney, dated 4 years back, hospice paperwork only, nothing more. And beside it, the notarized revocation I'd filed with the county 6 weeks earlier, its notary stamp still crisp and dark against the page. Deb read the first page. Then the second. Her face didn't change quickly, she's too good at her job for that, but her pen stopped moving. "This power of attorney was never authorized for a commercial loan guarantee," I said. "Todd used it anyway, 8 months ago, for $61,000 in my name. I revoked it formally 6 weeks ago. Every bank involved was notified in writing." Todd's face went from confident to confused to something closer to gray, in that order, in under 10 seconds. "Arthur, that's not, we were going to tell you, we were going to explain everything once the refinance. You told me at Thanksgiving," I said. "By accident. You just sent it to the wrong number." Melissa hadn't said anything yet. She was looking at the revocation document, then at me, then at Todd. She was piecing together, in real time, what her husband had actually done. In her name. Under her father's name. Without ever telling either of them the whole truth. "Todd," she said quiet, "what does he mean, in your name? What loan is he talking about?" Todd didn't answer her. That silence told her more than any answer would have. Deb set her pen down flat on the table, no wasted motion. "I can't process this refinance," she said quietly, in the same even voice she'd have used to read a routine denial. "Not with an active dispute on the original guarantee. I'm sorry, Melissa. This needs to go back to underwriting. It needs to sit there until the original loan is resolved on its own." Ray didn't say a word through any of it. He just closed the folder of title documents in front of him, squared the edges the way I imagine his father taught him, and slid it a few inches away. That said everything it needed to say without a single sentence. 30 years after I rebuilt his father's books from a shoebox, he was the one quietly closing a folder on my behalf. I don't think either of us needed to name what that was. I stood up, slid the letter opener back into my coat pocket, and looked at my daughter. Not at Todd. At her. "I love you," I said. "I'm still your father. That's not what this was about." 3 sentences. Nothing more. I didn't raise my voice once, in that room or in the parking lot after. Todd tried twice to explain himself further as we all filed out. Both times I simply nodded and kept walking toward my car. There was nothing left in that room that needed my response. Melissa stood on the sidewalk outside for a long moment after Todd had already gotten into the car, not moving, just watching me. I didn't go back. Not yet. Some conversations need a parking lot's worth of distance before they can happen honestly. Here's where the numbers actually landed. The $61,000 loan is back in renegotiation now, without the improper guarantee attached to it. Grasso Occasions has to requalify on its own standing, which it hasn't yet, and which Todd's insurance salary alone won't cover without real changes to how the business is run. The $340,000 refinance is dead. Deb's flag file finally got the second look it should have gotten 8 months earlier. The bank's compliance office opened its own internal review of how the original guarantee cleared in the first place. Nothing that touches Melissa or Todd criminally, Warren assured me. But nothing that helps their credit standing either. $61,000 is what Todd tried to quietly borrow in my name. $340,000 is what it would have cost to bury that first mistake under a second one before I ever found it. That's the actual price of 9 minutes and one wrong text message. Not the $61,000, the $340,000 it would have taken to make the $61,000 disappear. Todd didn't call me in the week after the closing. Melissa did, 11 missed calls by Sunday night, and I let 10 of them go to voicemail while I decided what I actually wanted to say to her. On the 11th, I picked up. "I'm not doing this to punish you," I told her. "I'm doing it because somebody had to check the number, and nobody else was going to." She was quiet for a long moment. "I didn't know he used your name like that," she said. "I swear to you, Dad, I didn't know the scope of it." I believed her. I still do. A daughter doesn't rehearse a sentence like that for the sake of her father's forgiveness. She says it because it's true, and because the truth of it costs her something to say out loud. We had lunch 2 weeks later, just the two of us, at the diner on 12th Street whose payroll I'd once fixed before a Christmas that almost broke them. She cried a little over the coffee. I didn't tell her everything was fine, because it wasn't yet. I told her I was willing to help her rebuild the business the honest way, on paper, with my name nowhere near a guarantee line unless I signed it myself. In front of a notary, with my own hand and my own eyes on every word first. Todd came by the house once, a month later, to drop off a folder of paperwork Melissa had asked him to deliver. He didn't come inside. He set the folder on the porch rail, next to where I happened to be sitting with a cup of coffee going cold. For a second his eyes landed on the small brass letter opener resting on the arm of my chair. The same one that had been sitting on my desk for 39 years. The same one that had been sitting on that closing table folder. He didn't say anything about it. Neither did I. He just nodded once, quiet, and walked back to his car. A number doesn't lie, but the person reading it out loud sometimes does. I spent 39 years learning to tell the difference, and it turns out that skill doesn't retire just because you do. Trust is the only account that charges interest the moment you stop checking the balance. I let mine go unchecked for 8 months. I don't plan on making that mistake again, not with Melissa, not with anyone. The letter opener still sits on my desk. Louise's father was right about it, all those years ago. A man who opens his own mail never gets surprised by what's inside it. If you enjoyed this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories. I will see you on the next one.